Mega Man X-Treme 2, released in 2001 for Game Boy Color, and only for Game Boy Color. There's no backwards compatibility to be found with this game, which is probably for the best. So Mega Man X-Treme 2, or Rockman X2 Soul Erasure for the overseas folks. Okay, maybe you should have stuck with Cyber Mission 2 or something like that. Is a semi-new adventure that recycles some assets from the first 3 Mega Man X games on the Super NES, mixes in some semi-original material in there, and as a bit of a bonus, let's toss in Iris from X4 as mission controller and give her nothing of note to do but spout out poorly worded phrases and stuff. With these things in mind, is Mega Man X-Treme 2 a better title than the previous game, or does it completely shit the bed? Well, how long is this video? This should be indication enough. Maybe not. Let's get into it. Mega Man X-Treme 2 gives you 2 modes of play from the get-go. An X mode where you play as X, and a Zero mode where you play as Zero. Yes, Zero is playable in this here Extreme video game, and he fights with his Z-Saber and gains attacks that are performed on command or selected on the menu, which sounds a bit cumbersome, and it is. Each mode has 4 unique Maverick bosses to fight, and once they're cleared, you'll earn the ability to swap places with your partner, essentially the franchise's first tag mechanic more or less, as you tackle the fortress stages and defeat your unique rival boss. Once both modes are completed, you'll unlock Extreme Mode, which gives you 8 Maverick bosses, the ability to switch between X and Zero from the very beginning, and a unique final stage where you'll contend with the usual boss rush, as well as a not-so-mysterious final opponent, if you've spent any amount of time playing Mega Man X. As per usual with these games, you can explore the levels, or their individual segments divided by auto-saving checkpoints that perform their function much more fluidly than in Extreme 1, to uncover hidden items, either one of 8 heart containers, one of 8 capsules, or one of 2 sub-tanks. Extreme 1 had 4, by the way. 8 armor capsules means 4 capsules for X and 4 capsules for Zero. Yes, Zero can also get armor upgrades from Dr. Light for some reason, though these are relegated to reduced damage, an extra attack, and 2 methods of breaking bricks. On the flip side, X's armor upgrades are a hybrid kit bash iteration of his previous armors. You get the X3 air dash complete with upwards dash, the X2 double charge shot with the ability to combine your shots for a wide spread that's completely useless, the X2 Giga Crush to go along with the usual reduced damage, and the X1 Head Crush, which seems to serve one purpose before being promptly forgotten about. Much like the PlayStation games that would come along afterwards, or during this time, this was released in 2001 after all, Extreme 2 has a parts system that can enhance your abilities when you equip them. Unlike those games, however, the parts system here acts more like a proper shop. You collect these DNA soul things from fallen enemies, which double as health and energy recovery, and you use them to buy parts from the shop. The more souls you collect, the more parts you unlock, and eventually you might even unlock options to purchase a completed armor for X, as well as additional play modes that would normally be unlocked by beating the game. I want you to process this for a moment. This cut-down Mega Man X adventure on the Game Boy Color managed to implement a parts system that is far superior to the first 2 generations of higher-end PlayStation consoles. Why is this so goddamn hard? In terms of using the parts, Zero can equip up to 3 parts while X can equip up to 4 parts, that is until he gets the full armor, in which case he could only equip 2 parts. Unlike in later PlayStation entries, you don't have the option to play as either normal X or armored X, so once you get the full armor, you're stuck with it until the end of time. So you'll have to decide whether you want more parts or a full armor, which you'll need to attain the secret capsule that will give you the Street Fighter, Fireball, and Dragon Punch moves, which function about the same way as they did in Extreme 1. Now, why would this be a hard choice? Well, you have a number of parts that are used by both hunters. Energy Savers, Super Recovery, a Hyper Dash that renders you invincible during a dash, that sort of thing. But it's the character-specific parts that prove the most useful, since some can boost your attack power, the speed of your attacks, and whatnot. With the right combination of parts, you can make short work of your enemies. Zero got the short end of the stick here, only 3 unique parts and mostly associated with increasing damage. Bit of a shame since Zero could have used a part to extend his pathetically short range. As far as X is concerned, This is where we go back to the conundrum of whether getting the armor for X is a good idea. Armored X might give you an edge and eventually some Street Fighter moves, but normal X equipped with the right 4 parts is a walking weapon of mass destruction. And you pick out 3 armor upgrades without ever touching that last to keep your current form, and you enable rapid fire in the options on top of that? Forget the ultimate armor, this is the most powerful version of X ever conceived, and imagine how things would have played out with this guy around to take care of things. In some sense, such a potentially game-breaking upgrade is made possible to make up for the fact that the weapon selection in X-Treme 2 is probably the worst aspect of the game, which confounds me to no end considering Mega Man's whole shtick is gaining weapons from bosses and using them to your advantage, whatever that entails. Let's start with the process of getting weapons, which is fairly straightforward in the individual missions, and pretty much old hat to anyone familiar with traditional Mega Man fare: kill the boss to gain their weapon. Once you clear the initial wave of 4 Mavericks, you'll gain a gimmick to summon your partner who has no weapons. This is also true when you start a new game from a save file, where your new character gains all the weapons from their set of 4 Mavericks, while your old character that shows up around the same time has absolutely fuck all. Okay, fine, whatever. But then getting weapons in the unlockable Extreme mode is also awkward. In Mega Man X5 and up, you beat a boss and you get weapons for both X and Zero, and later Axel in later games. In Extreme 2, only the hunter who dishes out the killing blow on a boss gets the weapon, while the other hunter gets nothing. So if X kills Launch Octopus, for example, only X gets the weapon and Zero gets nothing. It runs contrary to what would eventually be established, and thankfully, this did not stick beyond this one game. It also doesn't help matters that the weapon selection in Extreme 2 is somewhat underwhelming. With X, you not only get familiar weapons such as Strike Chain, for example, but also new weapons. Beating Neon Tiger, for example, gets you this Ray Claw thing instead of the Gatling Ray Splasher you'd get from X3. Flame Mammoth nets you not the flamethrower that was really great in X1, but rather a Fireball Lobber, which is Other than boss battles and situational bits involving requiring weapons to gain access to power-ups and such, these weapons saw little in the way of action, and that's rather unfortunate. Zero gained some familiar moves, a rising sword slash thing, a downward stab thing, couple projectile attacks, and some of the Zero scramble attacks from the previous X-Treme game that you could only enable by selecting them from the menu, which is inconvenient, but I guess there's only so much you could do with a limited button setup. And speaking of which, control's a finicky thing here too. It's responsive to a degree, but there's a general slipperiness in terms of how you move about, particularly in regards to dashing. Not only that, but there is also an air dash ability to worry about. With no dedicated dash button, you'll have to press the jump button to perform said air dash, which is easy enough to figure out, but it also makes it easy to pull off by accident and could cause some problems as a result of an errant air dash you didn't intend. This is something to be mindful of, and once you get the hang of things, shouldn't be too bad. Fortunately, pressing start brings up the weapon screen, as it should, and you could choose whether the select button has you cycling through weapons or swapping between X and Zero. Given the uneven quality of the weapons and how infrequently I tend to use them, I stick with the partner switching, but the fact that you have the option is much appreciated regardless. Finally, I guess I should touch on the levels, which are a combination of levels based on their SNES originals with slight deviations here and there, and some new levels with some inspiration from what came before. In terms of the SNES-derived levels, they're about as you expect, similar layouts that should be old hat to those familiar with the levels they're inspired from. When it comes to the new levels, however, they are a bit of a mixed bag. A couple levels introduce a wave effect that occupies 2/3 of the screen, one of which will either damage you, kill you, or merely carry you with the current. These parts are brief, but they range from annoying to hell-forged frustration, especially the parts where you have to rely on finicky dashing to make it through. Aside from that, I like that Volt Catfish has taken resident in Toxic Seahorse's sloppy leftovers. I'm not a fan of Blast Hornets hopping on helicopter bits, and while I like the idea of giving X and Zero their own separate stages to play towards the end, it'd be nice if they were stages that play to their strengths and not just done for the heck of it. Otherwise, I've played worse. Mega Man X-Treme 2 shares a similar graphical style to X-Treme 1, which shouldn't surprise anyone who has played this franchise for who knows how long at this point. But basically, you have some nice looking backgrounds, some adequate yet inconsistently scaled sprite work, a good chunk of it recycled from the previous game, but that's okay, it's to be expected, and some staticky static unskippable cutscenes with big fonts and little worth reading. Still maintains a solid pace, never really suffering from lag or slowdown, and still prone to occasional bits of flicker, making smaller bits somewhat harder to make out at times. Audio-wise, it's a mixed bag. Once again, sound effects are nothing to write home about, and the constant droning of the charging sound kills the music, but the music itself is adequate. Once again, it's 8-bit renditions of the appropriate tunes from the 3 SNES games, though a couple of X3 tunes use the remix versions from the PlayStation version, which actually sound better here than in that version. Some tunes have been shortened somewhat, so they loop more often, but other than that, it's there. Overall, Mega Man X-Treme 2 is a perfectly adequate little game. Is it better than the first X-Treme title? Well, it's certainly a more unique title than the previous one, not relying too much on recycled bits, trying to forge some original levels to varying degrees, and implementing some unique features like a tag mechanic and shop feature. That and the boss rush mode that lets you tackle Maverick bosses from both X-Treme games is a nice touch. So based on that alone, X-Treme 2 is certainly the more enticing package and probably the better option given the choice between the two. That said, I do feel X-Treme 1 is the slightly better experience. The levels may be recycled, but they're still good shit. The super wall jumping is somewhat spastic, but not as much as the air dashing. I don't know. Personally, it's a toss-up and both games are perfectly fine and complement each other just fine for what they are. Ultimately though, both games are pale imitations of superior products, and if you've never once touched either game, you're really not missing out on much. Still, for curiosity's sake, they're worth a shot.